This is Boomer Life on CIL 650.
Oh, dear, what can the matter be? Dear, what can the
Oh
matter
dear.
be?
Welcome back to Boomer Life here on CIO 650. I'm Sterling Fox, joined in studio by the group from Neurokinetics Clinic in Vancouver on Granville Street at 16th. Our guests in studio are the clinic founder and president, Philippe Souvestre. Sonia Dale is the clinic manager. JC Gordon is the clinic's director of liaison and logistics. On this program, we're talking about trauma, impact, and disconnect. We were very fortunate to, a few minutes ago, have heard from a former neurokinetics patient, Doug in Vancouver, talk to us a bit about his experiences. And Philippe, let's talk about what you did with Doug. Now, not everyone is in the unique position of being able to afford to go to clinics in California and across Canada and elsewhere, seeking out trying to find out what's wrong. Doug was a successful businessman, had a few bucks, and spent them in ways that he thought could help his development. He was suffering from disconnect due to some kind of traumatic event. So eventually he finds his way to neurokinetics and to you. And I would imagine, and Sonia, of course, you would have talked to him first, when a patient like Doug, with a long history of clinical appearances elsewhere, says, can I come see Dr. Philippe? Do you ask them to bring the paperwork from their previous clinical experiences along with them?
Yes. If they can, and if they don't have the records, then what we do is the time they do come in for their appointment, I will get them their authorization basically to have those records sent over to us directly.
Okay.
To assist in that process for them if they don't have the records on hand with them physically.
Dr. Philippe, now this is a guy who comes to you and says, I'm totally disconnected. I'm out of it. And somehow or another, you are able to determine that this has a lot to do. And he told us he was delivered as a baby. The obstetrician used forceps in the delivery and caused some brain trauma to his temporal lobes, and that inhibited his brain development from day one up until he became a patient of yours, probably in his 50s by then, right?
Yes.
So did you know that when he came to see you, did he know that the traumatic event that caused the disconnect that he was there to see you about was his delivery at birth? Did he know that at that time?
Not at all. We discovered that through the process. It took these 3 sessions of assessment to identify the length and the extent of his trauma history.
Right.
And his developmental stages, pattern. And we identified that he lost a part of his capabilities to grow up and catch up cognitively and with a normal brain psychophysiological development.
Right.
Yeah. But he was not aware at all on this.
So interesting. So this, and I would imagine that this is the case in a lot of instances where you see patients who come to you and say, look, and in Doug's case, my gosh, how many clinicians and practitioners had he seen before you? I would say probably dozens.
Yes.
And so many patients come to the clinic going, look, I've seen my share of docs. And so far, no one is, as Sonia says, in many cases, they don't even get listened to respectfully, let alone treated so. And so they have, in many cases, you just somehow or another have a way of unraveling a patient's history to the point where you're able to identify the event, that single event that has caused all of the distress for however many years.
I am on a hunt for that.
Okay. Now, Doug mentioned specifically, and I'm coming back to this because we did it last month, too. We had a young cyclist who becoming a champion or on his way, and he had talked about something in the balance test. Now, Sonia,
Right.
in the past, you've described where when someone comes to Neurokinetics to seek out the services of Dr. Philippe and the
Yes.
rest of your team, first of all, there's that one meeting in which the individual sits down with you and JC and others to talk about what the clinic might be able to do for you.
Correct.
And is this going to be a good fit?
Yes.
And if it's determined that it will be, then and only then does the patient agree to go forward and go through those 3 4-hour assessment moments with Dr. Philippe,
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
So, okay, Doug now has seen you, Philippe, for 12 hours minimum. How long did it take you in the process of that 12-hour experience to identify that this guy's problem actually quite literally goes back to day 1?
It takes the 12 hours plus.
Okay.
It is an ongoing discovery through the process.
Okay.
You know, it's like any investigation. I am trained as an investigator. I was trained in France as a post-crash aircraft crash investigator. So
Okay.
I have been trained as an investigator. And you begin to build up your map. You map out what you see, and you look for correlating and taking the dots in a process.
Mm-hmm.
So what you cannot explain at a given stage, you put it aside, put it on a map with a big question mark, but you keep it inside.
Sure.
And you pursue your investigation.
Move
And
on,
at some point, the puzzle, you pick that bit because that bit is actually missing somewhere further down on
Right.
the map.
Okay, now let's talk about the balance stuff. Again, going back to our young bike rider there last month, and now Doug, a much older individual, probably going to respond to those physical tests quite differently. What is it about? Because Doug said, he told us, just by watching a person's eyes and watching how they stand or do this on command also can tell you a lot about that person's thought processes. So
Yes.
what is it about the balance test that works so effectively for you?
Okay, the balance test is only one of the tests
Of
we
course.
use in our battery.
Absolutely.
It is a fundamental one, though, which is not really well understood in general mainstream approach of trauma. To make a long story short, it ties with what we know now about brain functionality, and I would dare to say the equation that goes with it that allows to quantify the amount and quality of the cognitive processing, which is again the software necessary for the brain, which is only anatomy, to work out
Sure.
all the beautiful types of performance we are able, whether physical or mental, including intellect and intellectual, emotional, and executive as well, which are complex actions. So we use this test using, as an example, the balance test, and we have a very accurate protocol which provides us with a lot of data which reflects the quality of the sway, the quality and the magnitude of the sway. Well, those data also belong to a set of multifactorial capabilities which are, as we say in our domain, operate in a brain in synergy with each other, which is in harmony with each other, and each of those components being necessary to perform a good sway.
Okay,
Talking about balance
right.
test. So it ties with this equation, forgive the hardcore a little bit here, but the equation that reflects the bridge between physical performance and mental performance.
Okay, sure.
And in that sway data will allow entries to understand dysfunction that could, through sway alteration, reflect mental factors and physical factors, brain-wise.
Right. Sonia, you mentioned that after a person goes through the typically approximately 12-hour intake process, 3 assessment meetings, 4 hours apiece, preferably one day apart, doing 4 hours and come back the next day for another 4 hours, and then come back the next day for another 4 hours. So there's 12 hours with a doctor that a lot of these people probably never had. Not many of us get 12 hours with a doctor over 3 days unless we're in really bad shape.
Yes.
And I'm talking about, operations and such. But this is a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
Right. It is.
So how long, once the treatment program, after Philippe has had a chance to assess the patient and determine the best method for restoring that, optimizing that person's brain, to use your phrase, JC, so it's typically what, about 12 weeks?
Average of 12 weeks is a program that we've looked at, and we've averaged out roughly for most patients here in the clinic. So you would say, I'm going to say minimum 12 weeks.
Okay.
So they come into to the clinic, and we found that 12 weeks is usually the bare minimum that they do need. It can go up maybe a week or few weeks, some on the severe side of things to a few more.
Right.
However, 12 is the minimum. And then treatments range from anywhere, to, 2 sessions, treatment sessions a day to, depends on the time of 90 minutes to 60 minutes, depends on the time and what Dr. Philippe suggests for them from there.
Right. Philippe, also during the 12-week treatment period, Doug described, and I love the way he described it too, he said because of this traumatic event at birth, his brain development was compromised to a certain degree, so there were certain things in his life that most of us experience that he had never experienced because his brain didn't allow him to. It just didn't go there.
Yes.
So how long into the treatment program did you discover this, and Doug start to be overwhelmed by sort of the updates that were coming back to him since that traumatic event at his birth?
Okay, what you mentioned here reflects to patterns we are looking at.
Okay.
And they can highly vary from between individuals, and which means between trauma histories, as far as trauma impact is concerned. And in Doug's case, as an example, and seen from the top of the hill, a few progresses have been seen pretty early in the program, but they were still vacillating. They were oscillating. It's like a flower starting to open, but then there's a resting pause, and then pushes again, and each time it's with a greater magnitude, right, and greater completion in the opening of it. And that's what we very commonly observe. It is a very beautiful time to see that. We have expectations before starting the program in the light of the assessment data. We have an expectations of what is going to happen. We have this capability. That is the type of method we use that allows this to foresee. So we have expectations.
Sure, of course.
And we are now doing the awakening phase of this dormant brain in some areas.
Exactly.
And through stimulating the proper connections, which relates to body energetic using Eastern medical techniques and procedures in the light of the Western body of knowledge about neuroscience and anatomy and physiology as we know it in Western medicine. That is also a beautiful model that allows to monitor and get this awakening process on.
JC, you like to use the phrase brain optimization a lot. Let's apply it to Doug's context here, and how quickly it happened. I mean, 12 weeks is not a very long time, especially for a fellow who'd been going to clinicians in Canada and the United States. He'd been on a long, long journey and achieved very little satisfaction. And all of a sudden, he's in neurokinetics, and inside of 12 weeks, suddenly life is, as Dr. Philippe just said, is blooming. So how apply the term brain optimization to Doug's case?
Sterling, if I could simplify the brain optimization process that happened to Doug, it would be like converting his pre-neurokinetics software from an XP program of dysfunction into a Windows 10 version of function.
Gotcha.
And that's the simplistic overview of what happened with Doug. And Doug so eloquently last session talked about what that meant to him, because he had lived the first 50 plus years of his life in an XP program, and all of a sudden he's being introduced to a Windows 10, and he had to reassimilate himself into the world to actually realize what his true potential really is. And that's what brain optimization can do. It unleashes our true potential.
Allows him to discover the infinite resources of the brain. That's the one thing that we're told, Philippe, and I find this incredibly challenging and frustrating. We're told that human beings, throughout the course of a typical lifespan, will use less than 10% of our brain's capacity. I find that frustrating because I'd like to find out how to use more, and challenging because, by gosh, I am going to find out how to use more. Is that typical? Is 10%? Is that a number you're comfortable with?
It varies with individuals,
of course. But
so,
on average?
Yes, on average, I would say yes.
Isn't that something, eh?
And it ties
all
a
that
lot.
Untapped stuff going on.
It ties also with misconceptions about what we can do with our brain.
Right.
And lifestyle will also adversely impact on brain capabilities. And we mentioned earlier in past shows as well about how one may be led to reach help and support using addictive patterns and modalities to just keep boosted and operate, able to operate. And that is the side effect and the double-edged sword we have in our lifestyle. And when it is adverse, that will alter and prevent to go beyond the 10% we want to.
The challenge is always, it's going to be there for the rest of my earthly days. How to get at that remaining 90%. Our guest from Neurokinetics Clinic, if there's anybody in town who would know more about getting to the 90%, it's Philippe Souvestre and the team at Neurokinetics at 3195 Granville Street here in Vancouver, and online at neurokinetics.com. Back with more on Boomer Life after this quick timeout.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CIAL 650.